I'm back. Whoa, this is vanity is taking quite a hit here. I got to tell you, after I watched that first one. But I did read that the camera adds 10 years. Is that what I heard? Something like that, anyway. So where were we? We were talking about that you grant all the rights to someone, and maybe you can get them to agree to have you approve some things that you might find objectionable. And really, you'd have to almost engage in a contractual exercise I like to call playing the what if game. That's really what you're doing with an agreement, and why agreements are so long is because you're trying to take care of every contingency that could occur, and you never really are um, able to do that. But you try as best you can, just like what if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? To try to take care of those concerns. I think we have some things right now going on with I forgot if it was baseball or football or somewhere where usually in every agreement there's what we call a force majeure clause in an agreement that says, hey, if there's some act of God that prevents me from doing something, then I'm relieved of all my obligations. Um, and a lot of the agreements that are in place right now, even though they have that kind of clause, they don't define act of God as including a pandemic. And so a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money because I think it was in the concert field that, when they cancel Coachella, they're still on the hook for some dollars because there's nothing in there that says if we cancel for a pandemic, we're off the hook. So um, the what if game takes a lot of imagination. So if you're a writer and you're thinking, they have all the rights to do this stuff, you might think to yourself, what if they did this and how could that hurt me? And as I said, these restrictions or limitations on what a publisher can do with your material are very difficult to get as a first timer. In co-publishing agreements and administration agreements, they're much easier to get to be able to restrict the publisher from doing something, but here it might be more difficult. So let's play the what if game. As you can see from some of the rights that they specifically enumerate in this agreement, there might be some things that make you think of stuff. So the first thing they talk about in there, what they can do with it, is they can make changes to the song. Now, as a writer, I would object to this. I would say, no, you can't make changes to the song because it has two really important consequences. Number one is on the artistic side, that they're taking a song that you've written, you've got your name on it, and then they're going to make changes which you might not really agree to as representing you as an artist. So I would say no changes without me being able to approve those things. You might be able to get that because there's some reason to believe that's okay to do that. The second important negative consequence of them making changes to the song is that it would incorporate another writer and it would diminish the share you have of the song. So it has some serious financial implications as well. So I would say that's one that you might be reasonably able to get because the concern is so great on the writer. Now, the publisher still has the opportunity to say, hey, this is how we're going to change it, and we won't reduce your share, and look at the changes we made, or you get the first shot at changing it so that it's less objectionable to you. So there's ways to accommodate each other in this provision. So I would say number one, they shouldn't be able to make changes to the song without getting your approval. Number two, geez, they have my song. What if they license it for some synchronization purpose that I don't like? I don't want to be associated with a particular product, or I don't want to be associated with a particular movie or something like that. Once again, very difficult for a publisher to want to agree to that because that is a substantial amount of income. You can make much more money by getting a song in an ad than you can getting a song recorded, even by a major recording artist. Same thing is true with some movie placements and some other things. Also, those placements provide tremendous exposure and promotion for the underlying song. So without a lot of bargaining power, you're not likely to be able to get any restrictions in that regard. However, you may be able to say, all right, I don't want to tie your hands completely because I know what a significant source of income this is. But with respect to advertisements, I know you're not going to give me a blanket right to approve any use of my song in an advertisement. But I got some particular concerns. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't want you to put it in a meat commercial. Well, how much is that tying the publisher's hands to not be able to put a song in a meat commercial? Or I don't like potato chips. Who doesn't like potato chips? So you could put in specific products as long as it's not tying the hands of the publisher too much. If you have some really strong feelings about something and they still have a whole other world of licensing opportunities, that may be all right. You should know that typically you can get a restriction automatically on tobacco, alcohol, firearms, political ads, and, of course, the highly objectionable feminine hygiene products. So those are the categories that, honestly, you could get negotiated in there without any problem at all. They're pretty standard. Anything in addition to that, you need to argue for, make sure it doesn't tie their hands too much. The same thing is true with maybe movie placements. A very typical thing is you can't put my song into an X-rated movie. Or is there still triple X-rated movies? X-rated movie, triple X-rated movie, pornographic movie, anything that you might find objectionable. Vin Diesel movie, that'd be the worst. So as long as you're very specific with the type of thing they can't do and it still leaves them a world of opportunity to do things, they would probably agree to that. A third thing, there's many of them, I'm just going to give you 4. You have to use your own imagination for them, but these are pretty typical. Number 3 is no, they can't give any sweetheart deals. Sweetheart deals to people. No sweetheart deals. That is licensing your material at less than what it should currently go for. And the most common scenario where this might occur is where a publishing company is dealing with a related company and licenses that material for less than they normally would. So it could be a situation where you're signed to Sony Music Publishing, and they license one of your songs for $10,000 for the new Avengers movie. They don't do Avengers movies, but let's say Avengers movies. And normally you might get $50,000 for something like that, but because they're related companies, they're letting them have it for $10,000. That wouldn't be good. There was a situation way back when Warner Chappell licensed a song written by Jackson Browne to the Eagles, and they licensed it for not the full rate, but the 75% rate, which is really not bad. I shouldn't say not bad, not unusual in that time period. But what they did was they didn't do it 75% of whatever rate is in effect at the time. They put it in a specific dollar and cents amount. So the current statutory rate was 2 cents, and so it was licensed for 1.5 cents. And that meant it was going to be 1.5 cents forever, even though the statutory rate went up to 9.1 cents, and they should be getting 75% of that, which is 6.825 cents. So instead of 6.825 cents, they were making 1.5 cents on that song, which may not seem like a lot, like a nickel. However, that song happens to appear on the Eagles' Greatest Hits, which is the biggest selling album in the history of the world, and in the underlying album in which it occurred. So those nickels add up to millions of dollars ultimately. So what you want to have in there is no sweetheart deals. The way sometimes it's explained or used in contractual language is that all transactions must be at arm's length. Arm's length. Arm's length is a term of art used in this business, meaning that if you're dealing with related parties, you must deal with them as if they were unrelated parties. All transactions must be arm's length transactions. So that might be an additional prohibition you put on there. And that's not unreasonable and certainly possible to get. What do I have, 4 there on that outline? I'll give you one more. And this is pretty complicated, and I might revisit it and explain it more thoroughly later. But if you have enough bargaining power, and this one takes a bit, you don't want them to engage in any block licensing. Block licensing means that a company is licensing your material with a whole bunch of other material to some third party. So it might be that they're licensing your song to the new Avengers movie, and they're licensing a lot of songs from their catalog. So maybe 10 songs from their catalog into this movie, and they're going to receive an advance or a fee of $100,000. And that means you get 1/10 of that due to the concept of proration, which we will get into later. That is, if they're getting $100,000 for 10 songs, then each song is entitled to 1/10 of that. That's called proration. And the reason why that's bad is because maybe your song is really, really good and licensed on its own might have gotten $60,000, and these other ones would have only gotten $5,000 a piece. But because they licensed it all together for one fee, they were able to prorate it down. And they might have better deals with their writers on those other songs, and so they want a lesser amount of that total apportioned to your song. So we'll revisit this concept in a minute, but no block licensing. Very difficult to get, but the inability for the publishing company to license your song together with other songs to a third party. So those are 3, 4 restrictions, and there's many more. You'd have to play some sort of game to figure out what those other kinds of restrictions you'd want to put on them. And that game is called the what if game. What if they licensed my song with other people's stuff? That's what you think to yourself. How can they hurt me? Because people will figure out those things to do that will somehow impact you negatively. Finally, in that grant of rights, there's a paragraph dedicated to the use of the name. What I'd like you to do is maybe try your hand at looking at that paragraph, and I'll come back to it. Try your hand at looking at that paragraph, and just from some of the things that we have discussed thus far, think of some ways in which you think, maybe I should negotiate the language of this paragraph a little differently. So think of some of the major contractual principles and methods of negotiation. Think about the way some of those things have occurred. We've spoken about them here, and try to apply them to that paragraph. Can you do that for me? And then maybe at the beginning of the next lecture or the lecture after that, we'll go over how we might mark up that paragraph, how we might strike some things to be deleted, how we might add some language, how we might change some language in that paragraph. Can you do that? That's paragraph 3. Subparagraph C. Subparagraph C. Play the what if game. Use some of the negotiation strategies I've spoken about. Read very carefully to discern the meaning of the language and see what kind of changes you would make to paragraph C. That's the use of the writer's name, image, and likeness. All right. Let's talk about money. Money, 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 money. Skipping a little bit ahead here to paragraph 7, and that has to deal with advances. Advances are very, very important, and the way they operate is very, very important. They're the money that you're getting, regardless of the amount of success that might be occurring under the agreement. You always, for money that is going into your pocket, you always want that figure to be as high as possible. Whoa, did we learn a lot in this lecture? It's money that you're going to be living on. It's money that you get regardless of whether the publisher is performing or not. It's an incentive. The higher the figure it is, it's an incentive for them to try to earn that money back. So you really want that to be as high as possible. Obviously, the publisher has the completely opposite perspective, is they want to pay as little as possible to reduce the risk of this deal not working out. Now, what you should know about advances is at least 3 things. The 3 characteristics of what an advance is. It's money that is paid to you as far as personal advances are concerned. Money that is paid to you that is non-returnable. That means you don't have to give it back. If for some reason this deal never works out, they paid you for 2 years, $25,000 a year. They put $50,000 into you, decide this ain't working out, and they let you go. You don't have to give it back. You get to keep it. The only way that they get that money back is to recoup it. So the second characteristic of an advance is that it is recoupable. That is, the publisher can pay itself back from any royalties that you earn. That is, before they pay you a penny in royalties, they will pay those royalties to themselves to pay themselves back for the money that they've advanced to you. And please be clear that this is money that is recouped from royalties payable to you as the writer, not the total amount of royalties that are earned from a particular song. So if they license a song for $100,000, they don't recoup your advance from that $100,000. They recoup that advance from your share of that $100,000, which in this normal agreement would be $50,000. So they can use that money that would normally be payable to you and pay themselves back any outstanding advances. And they will not pay you a royalty until they have recouped those advances. The third characteristic of an advance is a little bit more complex. So see if you can pay attention to this. You want to make sure that advances are not cross-collateralized. Cross-collateralized. It's a very, very dangerous thing. And what essentially that means is that if you have multiple agreements with someone, which you might be a writer and a recording artist, and you have a publishing deal with Sony Music and a recording agreement with Sony Records. What you don't want to have happen is for those agreements to be cross-collateralized. And what that means is that they should not be able to recoup advances paid under one agreement from royalties earned under the other agreement. And you will see this language in the agreement where it talks about advances. If there is cross-collateralization, it will say we can recoup this from any royalties earned under this or any other agreements between the parties or affiliates of the parties. That's language you want to automatically cross out under any circumstances, especially when you're when you're signing a publishing deal. You got a publishing deal and maybe a record deal. The publishing deal, the advances that are payable to you that they're going to recoup are mostly personal advances, which, as I said, you want to be as high as possible because they're paying you in advance of when that money is earned and it's going into your pocket. So you want that to be as much as possible. There are some other things that might be recouped under a publishing deal, maybe 1/2 of the demo costs. Those shouldn't be that exorbitant and too much to worry about. Advances under other agreements can be huge. So under a record agreement, advances are the personal advances they pay to you, which of course is fine. But advances are also considered to be any amounts they expend on behalf of you. So the entire amount it costs to make an album, which could be $1 million, they hire big name producers. Half of the marketing costs, tour costs, all sorts of things can be recouped. So you can have a mountain of money that needs to be recouped that didn't go into your pocket, that went towards other stuff. You don't want your publishing royalties going to paying for that. So try to avoid cross-collateralization as much as possible, especially in the days of these 360 deals. The only circumstance where cross-collateralization is okay, maybe, is where they're paying you tons of money. So I think when Michael Jackson signed his one of the big deals he had with Sony, they gave him $1 billion and said, this is for records, this is for some publishing, this is for when you do your videos for Captain EO for Disney World. Give you $1 billion, but we get that $1 billion back from wherever we want. All these things are cross-collateralized. That might be okay. You know why? Because they gave him $1 billion. So in that circumstance, it might be all right. Okay, so advances, pay particular attention when you're negotiating advances is the amount. And here's the first time we're coming across a range, where I give you a range of how much would advances be under a new agreement with a full publishing agreement with a new writer. Well, I don't know. It could be anything. Could be anything. Most of them will probably fall into a range, maybe 15 to 30, I don't know, 20 to 35. I hate to give ranges because there's probably most of them are going to come within that range, 15 to 30, but certainly it could be less than 15,000. You're signing with a small publishing company, just starting out, they want to give you 10 or 5. Or there could be a bidding war, like you're coming to town just off the bus, and you play some songs on a writer's night. There's 2 publishers there, and they love you. That this guy's the greatest thing we've ever seen. They get into a bidding war, and it turns out you get 40 or 50 or more $1,000. So it could be anything, but most of them are going to fall into that range, 15 to 30. Which, please be aware, that's not really enough to keep you in socks and food. I buy a lot of socks. So most of them are going to be there. If you're going to get a low advance, you know some things that should mean to you right away is that maybe you should be able to get out of the deal sooner. It shouldn't be a long-term deal because they're not doing the investment to justify a long-term deal. And number two, you should be able to get some reversion rights on those songs if they're paying you very little. So see how these contractual divisions come into interplay with each other and affect each other. When you are signing a crappy deal, what you want, and it's going to be for a period of time that might go beyond when you're not crappy anymore, you want to make sure, if you can, that a deal evolves with your success. And one of the ways you can do it within this agreement is to have that advance increase over time. And I think the italics to this or somewhere else gives you some ideas on how to do something like that. So it could be you say, okay, I agree to $25,000 in the first year, and you can have a little schedule for what it's going to be in future years. If you exercise the option for number two, it's going to be $32,000. Number three, it's going to be $35,000. Number four, it's going to be X amount. Because the fact that they're exercising those options is some indication that you're doing something right. And so you should make it worthwhile for them to exercise those options. You can even build in little bonus payments based on levels of success. So if you get X amount of songs recorded, they'll spiff you another $20,000. If one of your songs reaches number 20 on the charts, or number 10 on the charts, or number 1 on the radio charts, you get spiffed $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 because those kinds of achievements usually are indicative that some money is being made. The most common way in which increases in advances are structured is to have some sort of reference to the amount of royalties that were earned the previous year. So you'll see this in publishing agreements, you'll see it in recording agreements. So it will say, I'll give you $25,000 for the first year. The advances for year number two will be based on a formula, and we're going to give you, usually it's a percentage of the royalties earned for the previous year, just to keep the math simple, and I'll give you a worksheet on this. Just to keep the math simple, say they'd give you $100,000. You earn $100,000 in the previous year. So it might say we will give you 75% of whatever you've earned in royalties the previous year. So that number would be $75,000, 100% of what you earned the previous year. Now usually it's not 100%, usually it's less than that, 75%, something like that. And then also the publisher wants some protection in there just in case you had an aberration of a number one hit that earned $300,000. They don't want to pay you $300,000 in the second year of a new writer's deal. So there usually will be a ceiling. So regardless of what that formula figured out to be, $75,000, it says for the first year, the most you can make regardless of the formula is $50,000. And from a songwriter's point of view, if you didn't earn anything in the first year, which is altogether possible for a new writer, you want to put a floor in there so that it's at least a certain amount. So even if you earn nothing the first year, your second year, you're going to earn $30,000. So you'll see a formula based upon previous earnings that says you're going to make X amount of whatever you earned. Your advances for the next year will be based upon a percentage of the royalties you earned, the writer's share of the royalties, the previous year. And there's going to be a maximum, and that should go up for each year. And there's going to be a minimum, and that should go up for each year. So that's a mechanism when you're signing a copy deal to try to make certain terms evolve and get better based upon the success that you're having within the deal. So keep that in mind as a contractual principle. Okay. Also, be aware of the timing of advances, what triggers the advances, when they have to pay the advances. Usually in a new writer's deal, they call it a draw. What's your draw? Well, I make $24,000 a year. They might pay you $2,000 a month, $1,000 every 2 weeks, something like that. And that's pretty simple. But in some circumstances, there are certain triggers and parameters for when somebody is on the hook for paying you advances. You've got to make sure that those triggers are somehow within control and somehow reasonable. So we'll run into that in our next agreement perhaps. But in this one, it's pretty straightforward. They pay you every 2 weeks. That's what triggers it. If 2 weeks are up, give them another $1,000. All right. I think that's that. If you have any questions on advances, and when we get to the end of this thing and we figure out royalties, we'll look at how advances are recouped and look at the numbers behind that. All right. This is the big one. Are you ready for this? This could take me the bulk of a day. All right, I'm at 25 minutes already. My goodness. All right, I talk too much. Just realized that. The next section I'm going to be discussing is royalties. So once again, I'll give you a little assignment if you need to take 10 minutes or a day between when you listen to these. Is try to read through that royalties provision and see if there's anything that's troublesome to you. We're just trying to develop some instincts in you, some reflexes in you, and they're certainly not there yet because we're running into different kinds of issues again and again. But think about in that royalties provision and in the accounting provision, that's paragraphs 8 and 9, if there are any kind of problems you could see playing the what if game or language that's suddenly bothering you, etc., etc. All right, until next time, it's been a pleasure.